Gerrit van Honthorst is one of my favorite artists. Of course, you hear me say that a lot because I have a lot of favorite artists. But he is an intriguing artist. I love his treatment of light. He's one of the Caravaggisti. He's one of the Dutch Caravaggisti, also known as the Utrecht Caravaggisti. And that means Valentin de Boulogne. This is Christ and the Adulteress. He is one of the French Caravaggisti, also a follower of Caravaggio. This work is at the Getty. It's huge and it's very, very compelling. You have the three-quarter figures, so it brings the viewer up close and personal. You feel like you are essentially there. The naturalism is unbelievable, and he is really, really one of the lesser-known Caravaggisti, but still an important one. Orpheus, not showing the Caravaggesque spirit as much as other works, but around 1614 to 1617, he's starting to assimilate some of the ideas of Caravaggio. And so here we have the figure of Orpheus from mythology, and he, of course, is playing his violin. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, Conversion of St. Paul. This is at the Cerasi Chapel, Santa Maria del Popolo in Rome. And it was done at the turn of the 17th century. So Baroque, perhaps considered his greatest masterpiece. It's certainly one of my favorites. Spotty spiritual life, dramatic moment. It's that moment where the figure of Saul, a soldier, is literally struck down by this flash of light / God. And it is this moment where this voice from heaven says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Now, not everyone heard this voice. For instance, this servant who's helping to control this horse by basically you kind of yank down on that bridle just real quick and real sudden to gain control of the horse. And he's in a precarious position. He's been tossed. The horse's hoof is it's right there. And so in any case, this is a pivotal moment. For 3 days, Saul, who becomes Paul, is blinded. And 3 is kind of a important number in the Bible, 3, 7, 12. There's certain numbers that recur. And the warrior becomes the apostle, a follower of Christ, after persecuting Christians. So he does an about-face. And so he is also believed to be one of the soldiers that tormented St. Stephen. St. Stephen is often shown with the rock, which was one of the implements of his martyrdom. St. Stephen also sometimes is shown with arrows sticking out of him. Very, very sad. But these martyrs often die these sad, tragic deaths, which is why they're called martyrs, martyrdom. So what makes a Caravaggio a Caravaggio? Spotty, spiritual light, not always realistic, to indicate God, Holy Spirit, a holy moment. Brown tonal background is often the case, especially in the later works. Sharp chiaroscuro, light-dark contrast. Tenebrism, murky figures come out of an obscure background. Connected to lighting, similar to chiaroscuro, but different. A half to three-quarter view, not uncommon. Again, it's bringing the viewer in close and personal. Naturalism, so much so he was generally in trouble over it. Dirty clothing, dirty feet. People look slovenly. Often biblical formats, biblical motifs. The church paid well. One of his colleagues basically said, you need to start doing this. And not particularly religious. He was a pretty wild guy, actually. Some evidence he had a lead poisoning that would have affected his behavior, and that this has been found fairly recently, but more earth tones than pastels, sometimes a limited palette. Candlelight or torchlight are often part of the Caravaggisti style. And followers, of course, are called Caravaggisti. Christ before the high priest. around 1617. Again, this is a number of years after the death of Caravaggio, who dies quite young. He dies in his 30s. Tragically, basically collapses on the beach. Rather rough life, lots of drinking, lots of partying, lots of ill behavior. So here we have Christ brought before the high priest by Roman soldiers. He was questioned about his teachings. His false testimony was called against him. And so New Testament subject matter shows up in the Gospels of Matthew 26. This is one of the most famous paintings made by Honthorst. And this is at the National Gallery in London. So it's quiet, it's contemplative. The expression of Christ is just really incredible. He's just, he is resolute, he is direct, he's making strong eye contact. A lot of empty space above the action, the shadowy figures in the background. The brown tonal background is very typical, as is the internal light source. That candle is fascinating. You see the reflection on the Pharisees' face. You see it on Christ's face. Christ's face, of course, is much more lit. Again, the spiritual lighting there is very much part of the Caravaggisti style. Honthorst, Christ before the high priest. He was brought before the high priest by Roman soldiers. He was questioned about his teachings. The work is, again, one of the most famous, and it shows a lot of Caravaggesque influence. You see this burning candle in the center. You see this arm and raised finger of the high priest. And under Jewish law, his claim to be the Messiah was punishable by death. And the book on the table is the religious law of the period. This is Gerrit van Honthorst's denial of St. Peter. Again, that brown tonal background. This is that moment where Peter is foretold at the Last Supper that before the cock cries 3 times, you will have denied me 3 times. And so it is that moment of humanity for St. Peter. And so denial of St. Peter, you have a young woman that's saying, aren't you the one? So this bright light shines on her face. She's seeking the truth. She wants to know the truth. And then he is kind of in slight shadow. So he's making a choice here. And then the soldiers here are kind of waiting to find out the answers as well. But it's this moment of truth, moment of prophecy, because it was foretold that this would happen. Liberation of St. Peter from prison. This is also Honthorst. And so this is where he's been imprisoned. He is in Rome. He is prayerful and he falls asleep. And then the angel comes and the chains basically fall from him and he's able to walk out of the prison. So it's this miraculous moment, this beautiful light shining in from the darkness. Light's kind of a key thing. You notice that. Here you can see the display. The incredible details. The hands are absolutely well done. The facial expressions, incredible. And then you see the detail of the chains that have been released, hanging on the wall. So Gerrit or Gerard Honthorst, I think I hear Gerrit more than anything else. Dutch artist, leading member of, again, the Utrecht Caravaggisti. His father painted tapestry cartoons, not cartoons like silly figures, cartoons like plans, very large-scale plans for tapestries, and studied under Blomart. 1610s, he goes to Italy, and this is important. He goes to Italy, and he's very, very influenced by what he sees. He also influences Rembrandt in turn. So, School of Abraham Blomart, Utrecht or Dutch Caravaggisti. goes to Italy 1616. Again, those ideas of Caravaggio get absorbed. 1623, he's the president of the Utrecht Art Guild. Art guilds were important because this was a place where they were exchanging different ideas and skills, and basically artists are starting to have a little bit more stature. He was visited by Rubens, another important artist. He married his common, not uncommon long ago, yes, weird now. Taught the Queen of Bohemia's children painting. This gave him prestige, of course. Court painter to Princess of Orange at The Hague. So he's a court painter of some note, and you can kind of see he's kind of a big deal. So we're starting to see the elevation of the status of the artist. Honthorst's Nativity, the light shining in this work is just breathtaking. The reflection on the faces, this child literally glows, and so you don't see the light source, but again, it's definitely shining out from the center of it. So this glowing light, and he was known as the Master of Light. No, it was not Thomas Kincaid, it was Honthorst. Honthorst is the original Master of Light. So his trip to Rome had an indelible, important impact on his style. And so he sees all this realism on this beautiful Italian light and this bold themes and realism and naturalism, a much more humanistic style. So this becomes something that definitely intrigues him. And so he starts kind of picking up these ideas of using the internal candlelight and these lighting effects, and it really starts to change his work. Adoration of the Shepherds, 1620s, Uffizi. Unfortunately, it was destroyed in 1993, and then you also have a detail of it or a close-up of it. But again, this golden light, this palette is also something that's very much Caravaggisti. So chiaroscuro from light, and scuro means dark. So it also means light and shadow to delineate three-dimensional objects. Baroque, like Caravaggio. He's part of the golden age of Dutch painting. This is called Matchmaker, 1625. It's also sometimes called the Procuress. And this is a genre work. It's a everyday scene. And so the Procuress is there, and she's negotiating a contract of sorts. This young woman is a prostitute. And of course, her wares are being displayed very, very clearly. That candlelight just makes them glow, creates a real focal point for the viewer. And then you see this beautiful outline around the young male's face. And again, they're negotiating terms here. And so these were didactic or teaching or moralistic works to just basically remind young women to be careful, to not fall into disrepute. Okay to have a glass of wine, okay to have fun in moderation. And these sort of themes recur in the 17th century. So again, it's sometimes called the Procuress, and moralistic, playful, fun. This would certainly have been an appealing subject matter, especially for the male viewer, because again, it's up close and personal. It brings the viewer right in to this transaction, essentially. The colors are just so vivid as well. But there's that candle that we just see the little bit of flame, internal light source. So Honthorst, Baburen, Terbruggen traveled to Rome, and again, it's first documented around 1616, and this impacts everything. This starts to really, you start to see the spread of the Caravaggisti. And especially he's known for these nocturnal scenes that are just absolutely breathtaking. And so let me move on. So most people take back useless souvenirs from Rome, but the Caravaggistis took back ideas. Honthorst took back ideas. And so certainly it was incredible. Sebastian was a Roman centurion who was discovered to be a Christian and was sentenced to death by Emperor Diocletian. He was bound to a stake and shot with arrows. He was left for dead, although the arrows had not killed him, and he was eventually stoned. And so this is the Saint Sebastian. And this is a recurring theme in art history. There's a number of images of this. And these martyrs are often shown at their death, and they're usually really tragic and really gory. Not uncommon. Steadfast philosopher. He's trying to turn away from this temptation of this semi-nude woman. So women were very much seen as temptresses in 17th century Netherlands, and men were to resist temptation. This was a philosopher. This was a scholar. Brothels, earthly pleasures, and so there is this moralistic aspect. But it's also playful and fun and great to look at. And so you have the exotic materials, exotic details of the Turkish export that is right across the table, that carpet or tapestry, which again often in Dutch art shows up on a table. You have these rich textiles of which the Dutch were involved in trade. So you're starting to see some really beautiful details that are also showing what's going on in that time period. So very playful. And she's kind of a homely thing, if you noticed. Although her body's pretty good. So Gerrit van Honthorst, this is Crowning of Thorns. This is also one of the masterpieces at the Getty. This is a detail, a small bit of it that's been enlarged. So you have the internal light source, you have this glowing golden color. It brings you right into the action, and to a certain extent it indicts the viewer because you are right there as well. You are participating. And so the strong light-dark contrast. And one of the things they often did is have contemporary dress. So this is a figure that is in more contemporary dress, whereas Christ is in more a dress of his time period. So this is the entire work, which is very large, and it's called The Mocking of Christ. And so dark brown, tonal background, internal light source, spotty spiritual light. Christ just glows. Light emanates from him. Realism, naturalism, the details are almost miraculous. So Honthorst 1622, Crowning of Thorns. This image involves mocking children, which is a little different. And it also does not have the same limited palette. There's more color here as well. And so, and you see this pain and despair in Christ's face, and the crown of thorns, of course, as he's being tormented. 1621, Samson and Delilah. And here, of course, you see her sawing off locks of Samson's hair. I'm going to read from George Ferguson's Signs and Symbols in Christian Art. It's a really good source for art historians and professors. And this is about Samson and Delilah. This is the scene that's most commonly portrayed, Samson and Delilah. Samson fell very much in love with a woman of the Philistines named Delilah. Hearing of this, the leaders among the Philistines urged Delilah to use her wiles, her temptations, to discover from Samson the secret of his great strength, so he might be deprived of it and overcome. So Delilah, with words of love, sought to beguile Samson into revealing his secret. Not until the third attempt did he finally confessed that the source of his mighty strength lay in his hair, which since birth had never been cut. Causing Samson to sleep, she called for a man, and she called to shave off the 7 locks of his head. 7, 3, 12. Again, these are numbers that recur in the Bible. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. Thus was Samson delivered into the hands of the Philistines. And so this is a biblical story. And again, that's it's a pretty good background information for saints and biblical stories that are common and prevalent in art history. And so here you see that internal light source. You see the contrast between the aged woman and the young woman. That's also a motif they use quite a bit. And so you see this person's kind of leaning in, like be quiet. And you see Delilah quietly working at the hair. Now it's a little bit different than the story that we read in Signs and Symbols in Christian art. And that happens where the artist uses some artistic license. And of course, this makes us be able to light up the beauty of Delilah and see this contrast. And then you see the vulnerable Samson as well, who's essentially a Christ figure. So Samson and the Philistines, early 17th century. This was originally attributed to Matthias Storm. And again, this shows lots of action, and it also shows this really, really exotic looking Delilah, who actually kind of has a masculine looking face, which makes me wonder if a man did not pose for Delilah, because sometimes that would happen because you couldn't always get a woman to pose for you because you were an artist. So because again, her face to me looks a little bit masculine. It's something that has crossed my mind when I've looked at this. There's that internal light source. They're coming for Samson. And so this is that moment. You have the drapery that kind of frames the scene. And you even have a dog in there that's kind of trying to be protective as well. But look at the details of this. And here you even see her breasts revealed, her jewelry revealed, and then there's this exotic turban. This is Honthorst, a married company with a lute player, 1619 to 20. And lute, music, merriment, all that's good in moderation. Too much music, too much merriment certainly is not conducive to a successful life. And this is, again, these Dutch 17th century rather moralistic paintings. And this one has that limited palette that looks rather autumnal, these golds and rust and browns, little bits of, there's a dark green gown in there that's very striking, and the details are really striking. And so, again, you're seeing this merriment and mixing of men and women. So this would have been kind of shocking. And then you also see the contrast of the older woman and the younger woman. The older woman with the younger woman right next to her is generally a procuress sort of a figure, a madam sort of a figure. This one is strongly believed that it's more of a wedding feast. You have a young woman who looks much more virginal, much more sweet, and the light is shining on her. Again, watch the light. And you have a group of people that seem to be having fun, but it looks a little bit more contained than in the prior example. Married Company 1620s. Again, the message is definitely more clear. Eat, drink, be merry, but moderation's a good thing. But these were popular. These were genre works that were popular. People enjoyed these. Supposedly they were didactic, they were moralistic, but they were also fun. and they're capturing a moment in time. There's that internal light source, and you see a glass with the light coming through it. Older woman again with the younger woman, and they're promoting this illicit relationship. So here you have wedding feast, and then you have, again, the much more overt married company. Married drinker is the first example, and then I have the second example is on the ceiling at the Getty, Santa Monica. You have to look closely to find it. It's in a little alcove right after you come out of the Dutch paintings. I think I was there several times before I noticed it, and it's beautiful, and it looks like they're looking over a balcony at you, and it's playful, it's fun, and you almost can imagine the music being played. Merry drinker, again, you see he's had excesses. He's playful, he's fun, he has those rosy cheeks. That's one of the signs that they've imbibed too much. So these were popular. These were ways in which the artists were making some money, because these were certainly playful works. Yes, they could justify it by saying that there was a didactic or moral to these, but even so, they're playful and fun and lively. There's rich fabrications. Here he is dressed in a very lively way, and you see the feathers, you see the contemporary details of the time period. And so this is the detail that is at the Getty. It was recently restored, so it's really quite vibrant and detailed. You can see the edge of the parrot there, and the woman with feathers, and music. And again, music is great, but in moderation. It was also viewed with suspicion that it could lead to all kinds of other things. The concert. And so here you see really brilliant colors. You don't have the dark tonal background that you more typically have. You do have the exotic kind of tapestry rug that is covering the table. And this was something that was often done in Dutch homes. And of course, they're enjoying music together. But in the background, you see a man and a woman, and they're obviously enjoying other things as well. And there's a woman there that her clothes is slipping off of her, and another man has a drink raised. So here you can very much see that music can be lovely, but it can also lead to other things. So they generally worked directly from posed models and brought their scenes close in to suggest an everyday experience. And again, bring that viewer into the picture plane. So he painted with style, assurance, bright colors, strong chiaroscuro, but this is lighter and brighter than usual. And so sometimes they're dressed in exotic, gorgeous costumes, and this one is one example. This was probably intended as an over mantel piece for the Palace of Frederick, the Henry of Orange, Nassau at The Hague. And so this is the concert. And I love that it's a group of women. But even so, the hair is falling down. The clothing looks kind of loose and pulled about. And so they're still not exactly reputable looking. You do have these little angels above with laurels, and certainly that seems to give it a little bit more, I don't know, authenticity, or a little bit more moralistic. But even so, music was viewed with suspicion in the 17th century. Honthorst, Merry Fiddler, compared to Franz Hals, a Merry Drinker, and this was 1628 to 30s. So this becomes a genre that becomes popular, and then you see it continuing with Rembrandt as well. But Merry Drinker with its the gold velvet fabrication, the really remarkable details of that lace. You can definitely see pre-Rembrandt here as well. So, two boys singing with a lute and a close-up or a detail of Frans Hal's merry drinker, the rosy, ruddy cheeks. He's had a few of these drinks already. So here we have Frans Hal's Merry Drinker, one of his most famous or notable works, if you will. And then we also have Rembrandt and Saskia. And this is a self-portrait of Rembrandt with his beloved wife Saskia. And this was done at one of the happier times in Rembrandt's life. If you've studied Rembrandt at all, you know that he had a lot of ups and downs. And towards the end of his life, it was pretty sad. And certainly this is a happier moment. And here he's raising a glass, and it's a large glass at that. And she's sitting on his lap, which in the 17th century, this would have been a little bit shocking. But it's playful, it's fun, and certainly one of Rembrandt's more famous works, certainly with him and his wife Saskia, who was a really attractive woman. Here we have woman playing the guitar, and this is Honthorst. A woman playing the guitar. She looks a little bit more disreputable. 1624, again, the sleeve is, the clothing is kind of falling off the sleeve. There is a double standard here, yes, very much so. This is Honthorst's violin player with glass of wine. And now it's interesting because the model we see in the first frame is also a model that's shown up in other works as well. She's recognizable in other works. She also has the very rosy cheeks that seem to indicate she's also had a little to drink. Not just a little bit of color, you know, to look like an attractive young woman, a little more than usual. So merry drinkers, brothel scenes, these were again very popular motifs in this Dutch genre works. And I think there's a voyeuristic aspect to it as well. They're interesting, but they're also playful and fun. Now, Rembrandt's portrait with his wife, Saskia, has also been called a prodigal son in a tavern. And so it also gives it a little bit of a biblical base as well. So his late portraits show a sad, disillusioned man. There's been a great deal of scholarship about Rembrandt's eyes, and the late works definitely show an emotional, depressed man. He was not a man of means anymore. He was struggling financially. He'd dealt with the loss of family members. His late works are a little bit tragic, and the palette gets more and more muted as well. Lots of brown. So here is that same young woman. It looks like the same model. Her hair's a little darker in the second work, but again, these are both Honthorst's, these married companies. So yes, you could drink, but you should do so very moderately, especially young women. And so virginity and purity was highly prized in Dutch culture. A monkey is a symbol of lust. You probably didn't even notice the monkey right away. And so it was considered dirty. And they're generally not considered positive symbols in art history. Exception would be Frida Kahlo's monkeys. She kept them as pets. And so they show up often, several times in fact, in her artworks. And then we have another example of these playful musical gatherings. But again, we have a Procurus type in the back corner of this painting. Now look at the center, still life. It looks very Caravaggisti. In fact, it looks a lot like a Caravaggio still life that was very well known. Married company. This is another example. So you could see they were popular. They were producing a number of them. I mean, it looks like a glimpse of a party, and then you see games, you see music, you see men and women drinking. So again, this was a little over the top, more than a little over the top. Flute playing shepherd with 4 nymphs, 1632, and this is at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and it's also a Honthorst. So, and again, this looks a lot more classical in style. You have the woman holding grapes. You have the women garbed in almost a classical style, but there is still a little bit of the contemporary to it as well. So, flute playing shepherd with 4 nymphs. And of course, the flute looks more than a little bit suggestive as well. One of his more famous works, this is Soldier and the Girl, 17th century. The Dutch loved these paintings, but the message was very, very clear. Here you see a young woman. She is lighting a torch, and as she's lighting this torch, this soldier is reaching around and embracing her, fondling her breast. The lighting is really beautiful. You have a limited palette, a very golden palette. You have an internal light source that's putting this light on her face. The light on his face is kind of divided. There's light and there's darkness, which is interesting and subtle. Fortune teller. This was another common theme, and this is Honthorst's Fortune Teller, 1620. You see some exotic fabrications. You see these gypsies that are basically coming in, and they're telling the fortune of this more well-to-do young woman. And she's got this jaunty hat, a hat that actually shows up in other works as well. So some of these particular objects were something that would have been in a studio and would have been reused. So sometimes you see a similar style of dresses, maybe a different color. But again, this is Honthorst's Fortune Teller. And the details are always so interesting because you have a sense that, of course, she's being tricked, and so it was basically saying, beware, be careful. And here you can see as she's again reaching out to show her palm. Again, be careful. Readings of cards. Be very careful of people stealing from you. You wanted to basically not put store in things like fortune telling. You definitely wanted to put more store in church teaching. So even though they're starting to have secular art, there's still an underlying premise that is, again, much more moralistic than you would expect. Now this is much more formal, a completely different style 20 years later, a much more academic style, much more courtly style, and this is Elizabeth Stuart, known as the Winter Queen, eldest daughter of James I, so very, very formal. She marries Frederick, the elector of the Palatinate in 1613, so of importance. He accepted the Bohemian crown in 1619 and was expelled from Bohemia in the following year. And so here she's shown with her little dog. The scale looks off to me a little bit, but even so, she looks very, very elegant. And her gown is revealing, but it's still more fashionable than over the top as far as that goes. This is from the workshop or atelier studio of Gerrit van Honthorst, or followers of Gerrit van Honthorst. And this is the portrait of Louise Christina, Countess. And here, this is oil on panel, oil on wood, around 1650. And you see stylistically very similar gown to the one you just saw. her anatomy looks impossible. Looks like her shoulders form a perfect triangle. Very stylistic. It's mannerist. And mannerism is where they have distortions of certain parts of the body, and it's done artistically. It looks very stiff to us, unnatural, but also really, really interesting. So hope you learned a little bit about Gerrit van Honthorst. He's one of my favorites of the Caravaggisti, and probably one that should get a little bit more recognition than he does. Thank you.